Okay, so welcome everyone to the June 11th Narcan training hosted by DAC. First, I want to say thank you to the Jefferson County Drug-Free Coalition who supplied the Narcan for our event tonight. We're giving this a try for the first time to see how a virtual Narcan training goes. We have a presentation first by Corey, who's going to give us a brief overview of Narcotics 101, and then Erin from, what is the new, oh my gosh.
Vivent Health.
Vivent Health, thank you so much. I almost just said the old name and then kind of brain farted there for a second, thank you. Because it's actually gonna do the training, and then when you're done, or when we're done with that, we'll be here at this location for you to come pick up your Narcan, which again is 12 South Wisconsin Street in Elkhorn, to pick up the Narcan. Immediately following the presentation. If that doesn't work for you, get in touch with us and we'll set up a time that we can make that convenient for you to get that. Again, I changed everyone's name to attendee to protect your privacy, and as we move forward, I just want to make sure that no one shares their video so that we can make sure that we're maintaining your privacy as well, okay? So if there's any questions too as we move forward from this, or as we're going through the presentation, if you want to do it in the chat box, I think that that could work for both Erin and Corey, that you could just do that. Otherwise, you could always just unmute yourself and just ask the question too. Just really be cognizant of making sure that you're not sharing your video, unless, I guess, if you don't care, but we're just really trying to protect your privacy. Because this is recorded, and in the future, we might use the recording if we continue to do the virtual presentations. It's not going to be posted anywhere, but we might record it that we could share as future presentations. So if anything else, then I think that we can get started. So Corey?
Okay. Can my audio be heard okay? Is it coming through just fine? Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. And do you have the presentation there, Katie, to put up? All right. I appreciate everybody's patience as we try this for the first time here. Yeah, and I'll echo what Katie said. If you have questions, feel free to just drop them in that chat, and we'll do the best we can to answer them. Got a short presentation here, and I know we have all different levels of experience or knowledge in the group here, attendees and presenters and members of the Drug and Alcohol Coalition. So I'm just going to give a basic overview of Narcotics 101. I have done a fair amount of research on the topic. I've worked in law enforcement for over 15 years. Was a participant or a member of the drug treatment court to help out with that, and worked undercover narcotics for 4 years. And Katie, do you have that presentation up? I'm not seeing it, but.
I just realized I wasn't sharing my screen, so sorry.
Okay.
All right. So.
So I will give a disclaimer. I'm a little bit of a blunt speaker. This is a blunt topic. So it does nobody any good to sugarcoat this. So there are some graphic images in my presentation, and I talk honestly about it. Transparency is one of our goals. So that's what you're going to get from us in the DAC. So go ahead and kick the next slide over, please. Katie Bell, there we go. This is the question I always ask when we're all together, and just about every hand goes up in the room. At this point in time, this is common knowledge. It's a widespread problem. This is not just a big city problem. I think everybody who's participating in this knows somebody personally, or family friend, or or even somebody in the family who's overdosed on narcotics. Again, not a big city problem. It's really a worldwide problem. Slide, please. So our coalition writes for grants, and Katie, our chair, does that very, very well. And so we've used some of those funding streams to put billboards up throughout the county. You may have seen this one. This was a couple of years ago. We try to maintain a good, through public health and through the medical examiner's office, try to maintain a good handle on stats for overdose deaths in Walworth County. And a couple of years ago when this went up, we had 91 dead over a 5-year period in Walworth County. So kind of a shocking image on a country road in Walworth County, but again, it's a reality. Slide, please. So then the next year, we had a few more deaths in that time frame. So we were up to 99 at the time we pulled the stats for this billboard. RU number 100. We'll have to pull those numbers again soon and see where we're at with this rolling 5-year average. Obviously, our goal is to get that number lowered. Slide, please. Here's a few signs and symptoms of opioid use, and you'll hear a lot of different words that are used interchangeably: narcotics, dope, opioids, kind of a family of narcotics. We're talking about painkillers here, basically. And I'll mention a few of those by name throughout this presentation. This is not an all-inclusive list of, if you're on narcotics, you will exhibit all these signs. Everybody's different. Your metabolism is different. Your tolerance is different. So pinpoint pupils, meaning that despite changes in light, the black part of someone's eye is pinpoint. Very, very, very small. And doesn't change with changes in light. Lethargy, just sloth-like movements, very, very slow. A lot of times there's some drooling that'll happen, mouth wide open, and the movements of somebody's hands are just very, very slow, almost comically slow sometimes. Disorientation, sweating, some of that stuff can happen during withdrawal periods. Track marks, again, not to insult anybody's intelligence, but if you use narcotics with a needle, you're going to be shooting into a vein and using the same spot over and over again can cause problems. So people will oftentimes move up and down a vein, and all those constant pin pricks up and down a vein will leave what looks like a track or a mark that goes up in a line following that bloodstream. Paraphernalia, on the next slide, I'll go ahead and show you some of the paraphernalia. And then drug slang. Drug slang changes depending on region, depending on month, week, year, it changes a lot. So there's quite a few sources on the internet that you can look up to find different drug slang. One of the websites that I'll need to put up on my presentation here is a website called Arrowid. It's E-R-O-W-I-D, Arrowid. And it's a good resource. It's kind of a dumping ground for people to put information in there. Drug users, recovery counselors, addiction counselors, people can load information on there. And it's a helpful source for what are the effects of crystal meth? How long does the high last? What is the difference between crack and cocaine? What are drug slang for heroin? So you can go to that website, Arrowid, and it's a good resource to get learned on street drugs and all things that go with it. Slide, please. Here's some photographs of drug paraphernalia, typically narcotics or heroin users, prescription opioids, that kind of thing. This is some of the paraphernalia you may see. Ripping the little corners off of sandwich bags, as you can see in the top center there. I haven't seen any legitimate use for the tiny little corners of sandwich bags being ripped off except to bag up dope. So sometimes you see those kinds of things in a teenager's room or in an adult's room with all the sandwich baggies. Thank you for dropping that in there, arrowhead.org. Hopefully everybody can see that in the chat there. Baggy corners ripped off of sandwich bags, a lot of tinfoil bindles, they're called, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen there. It's just a easy way to transport powdered drugs, be it crushed up pills or heroin that's been crushed up, chipped off of a block, that kind of thing. Obviously needles, that's the easiest one. You know, not everybody uses a bent spoon to cook up powdered narcotics, to cook up dope. A really common thing that we had seen in Walworth County was the tea lights. So the base of those tea lights, to use those as cookers. So when we would have a search warrant on a house, thank you, yep, with the cursor there. Search warrant in a house, you'd find all these tea light cookers laying all over, all charred up and blackened. They're very, very cheap to buy at a dollar store. You can buy a whole bunch of tea lights and, you know, really use the candles themselves. Those get tossed, and then you use the base, that little thin metal base, to cook up the drugs. Pills can be crushed. Heroin can be bought on the street in powdered form. Drop that powder into that tea light cooker, introduce a little bit of liquid to it, heat source on the bottom, and that'll cook it up and mix it with that liquid, draw it up through a syringe, and then bang it or shoot it into a vein. It's just a really common way, not healthy. Obviously, there's all kinds of communicable diseases that can be passed with needles. Met some drug users that a lot of times while going through withdrawals wouldn't have water handy, and they'd have a dry mouth. But maybe their buddy who's with them doesn't have those same symptoms going through withdrawals and trying to get these drugs cooked up. So met some people that would spit into the tea light cooker for their buddy, and then their buddy would be shooting that guy's or gal's spit into their arm with the heroin. Obviously not a safe practice. So Suboxone in the lower left-hand corner. Suboxone, also referred to as buprenorphine. That is a prescription medication that is prescribed to help people defeat their cravings for narcotics. So it's a sublingual strip. It's kind of like a translucent little strip, and it dissolves in the mouth. Unfortunately, those things are bought and sold on the street in Walworth County pretty easily as well, a lot of times in order to purchase narcotics. Those little bags in the center there, tiny little, 2-inch by 1-inch Ziploc baggies with the blue stars on them there in this picture. Those are commonly referred to as gem bags. Never actually met anybody that's put a precious gem in there, an ancient coin or anything like that. It's just for putting dope into, but just for putting drugs into. Those tiny little cottons, it's another important piece of paraphernalia to look for. Those tiny little cottons that are in the bottom of that tea light cooker, and then spread below that in the center of the, and up in the upper left hand too. Those are used as kind of like a filter when you have your powder drugs in the tea light cooker, and then you introduce some liquid, and then the heat source. There's sometimes some char or black powdery kind of stuff that goes on the top. You don't necessarily want to shoot that into your vein, so they will attach that little tiny cotton on the end of that needle and use that kind of as a filter. Met plenty of people that when they aren't able to score dope, they will recook the cottons because there's obviously some residual heroin or whatever the drug is in there. So they'll recook it, add a little bit of water to a whole bunch of cottons, and then shoot that. Had one person tell me it was almost more of a mental thing than anything, just to recook the cottons, to maybe trick himself into thinking he was shooting dope, but really it was a pretty diluted form of that. Go ahead and next slide, please. Fentanyl. Fentanyl is working its way across the country, imported from from overseas and from China and Myanmar and Burma and through the Mexican border. It's approximately 80 times more potent than morphine. So this is made in a lab, whereas some of your opioids are made from a derivative of the poppy plant. This is strictly lab made. So it's many times more powerful than your OxyContin, oxycodone, Vicodin, Percocet, that kind of thing. And unfortunately, drug dealers all around the country are cutting fentanyl into street drugs. So although you may think you're buying a gram or two of powdered heroin, there's just a little bit of fentanyl mixed in. And maybe it's the same amount that you've been shooting a couple times a week for 5 years. And maybe that day you use a little bit less. But there's a few grains of fentanyl in there, and you're dead like that. That's happening all over the place. They're even cutting fentanyl into cocaine, which is obviously doing two different things in your body. Not safe. We have had overdoses, plenty of overdoses in the county where the toxicology showed that that person ingested fentanyl along with another street drug like heroin or cocaine. So typically we've seen it in a transdermal system in the upper right-hand corner. That's like a patch that goes on somebody's body, and it's kind of a timed release over a period of days. A lot of times those are put on end-of-life hospice kind of chronic debilitating pain in nursing homes, that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, we have had cases in Walworth County where those patches have been taken off of people in hospice and in care and used by the person who is taking them off, sometimes family members, sometimes healthcare workers, and then used themselves or sold. Because it is an incredibly powerful narcotic, is fentanyl. It can be in a powder form, injectable, and pills, but at least in Walworth County, we've seen more of the transdermal system patch. Went to a training a year or two ago where they talked about how somebody had overdosed and they could see a high dose of fentanyl in their system, but we're trying to figure out exactly the source and how they ingested it. Took quite a while, but in the autopsy, they found that they had been eating small pieces of a patch cut up over time. It wouldn't have taken too many pieces of that patch to kill somebody. So that's what happened to that person. Slide, please. Yep, you're fine. Go ahead. So overdose can happen very, very quickly. Like I said, especially if there's fentanyl cut into it. There's not a whole lot of quality control in slinging dope on the street. So unfortunately, some dealers that we've had cases on have worn overdoses like a badge of honor, and they will tell people, hey, be careful with this. I just had somebody overdose last week on it. You got to make sure you're ready for this. This is good stuff, So word spreads pretty quickly that somebody is not stepping on or cutting dope. If people are overdosing on it, then it's closer to pure. No dope in the United States is going to be pure. It's always stepped on or diluted with a cutting agent, sometimes overseas and sometimes right when it hits the port or the border here in the United States. So a couple of photos of overdoses here. That one on the left with the two people still buckled up in their seats there and the child in the back, that was a screen capture off of an officer's body camera. And I think that's actually their grandson in the back there, but I could be mistaken on that. He was 5 years old. And they obviously used and then immediately fell out, immediately overdosed. Both of those individuals I read were brought back with Naloxone, Narcan, which we're here tonight to get and talk about. On the right-hand side, that gentleman there has what's commonly referred to as a foam cone. So that's when, and I'm not a doctor, but typically how it works is when you're taking narcotics, those molecules from the narcotics attach to molecules in your brain, basically telling your body to slow your heart rate down, slow your breathing way down. And when you do that, you're not exhaling carbon dioxide like you should be. So what happens is your body starts to fill up with fluid and you drown, or your heart stops. So this foam cone, even when supine or laid on your back, this foam will come out of someone's mouth and nose as they lay there, and their body filling up with fluid. So a lot of times in law enforcement, when we go to a scene for a pulseless non-breather who is normally otherwise healthy, and we walk in and we see this foam cone coming out of their nose and mouth, chances are better than not that they are overdosing on narcotics, and that's when we as first responders will use naloxone. Slide, please. A couple more photos. The one on the left was taken from a Facebook live stream. A bunch of people came across this elderly couple overdosing on the street and filmed it live on Facebook and laughed and made fun of them. I don't know if they lived or not. They were obviously struggling here, but it was viral. I want to say that was in Nashville or maybe Memphis, Tennessee when that happened, about 3 or 4 years ago. On the right there, you can see the little girl in the frozen pajamas. She's still holding her mom's hand when her mom overdosed. It can just happen that quickly, especially if it's cut with something or it's a lot stronger or closer to pure than you thought it was. I don't know if she lived or died. Good Samaritan Law is a more recent law in the past handful of years here in Wisconsin. Typically, people will use in groups, right? Somebody has the money, somebody has the car, somebody has license plates on the car, somebody has a valid driver's license, somebody's got a car without a tail light out, somebody's got the plug or connection down in Harvard or Waukegan or Beloit or Milwaukee, wherever they're going. So people will usually use in teams. They'll go as a group, and then they'll use, and maybe somebody's got a needle or somebody's got the straw or somebody's got the rig that everybody can use. Somebody's got the tie off, for your arm, whatever. But what we were seeing is that when people overdose and die on narcotics, they're found alone. Despite the fact that they used in a group of 3 or 4 people to go down and pick up and come back and use, we were getting to scenes finding people cold and stiff and by themselves. Maybe their friends call as they're miles down the road because they don't want to get in trouble while their buddy is dying there on the floor. So in order to kind of defeat that, Wisconsin passed a Good Samaritan Law, which affords some protection for people if say that their friend overdoses and the police come and there's people there that waited and tried to help that person as the rescue squad was coming. And then the cops come and ID everybody and ask for IDs, and then somebody pulls their driver's license out of their pocket and some drug paraphernalia falls on the floor out of their pocket. So if that person called exhibiting good faith to try to get help for their friend and against their own best interest stayed around to wave law enforcement in to help with the scene, there is some, I want to say immunity, but more protection for that person for calling, because we want to encourage people to call because it's a lot harder to bring somebody back if hours have passed and the scene has been cleaned up and we don't know what they took and that kind of thing. So that's a little bit on the Good Samaritan Law. I think it's meeting its intent. I think a lot more people are calling and getting help for overdosed individuals. Slide, please. So we're here for naloxone. Naloxone is the active component, the chemical in this drug that works, naloxone hydrochloride. So it's commonly referred to as Narcan. Again, a interchangeable term here. Narcan is pretty much the most commonly known brand name. So it's basically an opioid antagonist, meaning it fights against what opioids do to your body. So in this picture here, there's like a nasal cannula that's attached to a syringe, and that nasal cannula goes right in the nose and introduce naloxone. And naloxone, when introduced to the body in the bloodstream, those dope molecules that I talked about, the naloxone or Narcan kicks those dope molecules off and kind of tells your body, hey, start breathing again, get your heart rate going again. And people oftentimes wake up pretty quickly. if naloxone is introduced in time. And Aaron will talk more about that in a little bit. Slide, please. Another form of this, I believe this is the kit that you guys will be getting tonight. This is the one we've been handing out at the last couple of our Narcan events here. Very, very simple spray to use right in the nose. You're not attaching that cannula on like in that last picture. And we'll hear more about that in a little bit. Slide, please. So the path, when I first got into law enforcement and working drugs and that kind of thing, you know, you kind of wonder how people got hooked. You know, how did this actually, how did this actually happen? You know, and it's not the extreme minority of people are the people that just want to party and just want to try heroin. And those people are like unicorns. Of the hundreds, if not thousands of 1,000 people that I've met that have been on prescription narcotics or street heroin or whatever, I think I maybe had met one person, one or two people of those hundreds, maybe up to 1,000, that was like, I smoked dope in junior high. I started taking benzos in high school. And then after high school, somebody gave me some cocaine and they said, hey, I know a guy. And then I wanted to try heroin. So I got maybe one or two people. The majority of people may have made some bad choices, but I met a lot of people who were athletes that blew their knee out and then got hooked on prescription narcotics during their recovery. I met a few women who had C-sections that couldn't get off of the Percocet or Vicodin or whatever they were prescribed after the C-section. And a lot of times how it would work is you would buy after the doctor weans you off of that prescription, then you'll buy those same pills on the street. Well, that becomes very, very expensive because a rough translation I've heard sometimes is about $1 a milligram. And you're taking a few of those pills just to get by throughout the week. It becomes very, very expensive. Well, a heroin is a quarter of the price. So the natural progression is often from prescription medication onto street heroin because it's just not sustainable paying that much money for those prescription pills on the street. Methods of use will often progress as well. There's definitely a delineation between people who will snort crushed up pills or snort heroin versus people who will use the needle. There's definitely a stigma attached to it and a fear of needles for a lot of people. And there's sometimes that progression where people will start off snorting or eating it, and then they'll work to using the needle. But a lot of times those are two separate groups of users. And I made the mistake one time of accusing somebody, a heroin addict, of using the needle, and they were legitimately offended by it because they said, I'm not an addict. I'm not like a fiend. I would never use a needle. I only snort it. You know, I can quit anytime. That wasn't the case, but again, definitely a different group of users based on type of use. And really, I've always said this during a lot of these talks that I've done, there's really only two ways that this goes. You know, it's either incarceration or death. Rare are those people that can make it out of the life without getting arrested, without overdosing, and unfortunately, in some cases, dying. Slide, please. Victimless crime, nearing the end here, and then I'll turn it over to Aaron. Victimless crime was something I heard a lot, especially when I first got into working undercover narcotics. People would say, well, you know, they overdosed on drugs. They chose to use the drugs. That's on them. Forget them. It's their choice. There's no victim here. They're dead. One less drug user. And I heard that a lot. After I worked narcotics and worked with drug court for a while, I'm not a supporter of that. It never really was, but it kind of angers me now because when somebody overdoses and dies on drugs, it's not a victimless crime. That person who died is somebody's parent, somebody's child, somebody's relative, someone's best friend. So the victims are the ones who are left. to go on and try to make it without that person in their life. So it's absolutely not a victimless crime. This is why we're here tonight, to try to stop these overdoses, try to stop these ripple effects from the loss of these people. Go ahead and slide, please. Always like to put up some resource phone numbers. Crisis, Child Protective Services can be reached on the same number, 741-3200. Child Advocacy Center, which works very closely with CPS, 741-1440. We do a lot of work with them with forensic interviews of children who are in drug-endangered homes. You'll hear that term sometimes as well, DAC, drug-endangered children. A lot of times when people are in the throes of addiction, a lot of their priorities go out the window, not just hygiene and self-care and mental health, but also the priorities of taking care of their children. So a lot of times the children are the victims in these cases as well, just through neglect or unfortunately oftentimes abuse. And then Elkhorn Police Department. Walworth County Drug Unit is on there as well. They do take drug tips. You got somebody who you know is slinging dope, I'm sure they would listen. Slide, please. That's it. I didn't see any questions pop up while I was talking. If anybody has one, feel free to drop it in. Thanks for your attention. I greatly appreciate it. And I will mute and turn it over to Aaron.
Sorry, helps if I unmute. Thank you, Corey. I appreciate that. So I am Erin Howell. I am from Vivent Health. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Unfortunately, we're doing this virtually, but hopefully it'll answer everybody's questions and get everybody trained. I appreciate Julie and Katie and everybody at SEM and WALDAC for being able to get the Narcan to people. That's a big deal. All right, so we're going to look at opioid overdose response. Kind of just an overview of what we do as Vivent Health. So we have prevention programs. We also look at the harm reduction theory. We're also going to look at what opioids are. Corey kind of touched on this too, and how does an overdose occur? The signs and symptoms. Kind of look at some statistics, and then how Narcan works as well. And then looking at the overdose response model, and then we'll kind of go through exactly how to use the Narcan and any questions that people have. All right, so with Vivent Health, our vision is we envision a world without AIDS and strive to assure that everyone with HIV lives a long, healthy life. Our mission statement is that Vivent Health is a relentless champion for people affected by HIV and do all that we can to help them thrive because we believe every person has value and should be treated with respect. So the last time I did this presentation, we were only in 3 states. We've actually added another location. So we have several locations in Wisconsin. I work out of the Beloit office. There is one in Kenosha and Milwaukee. And Madison, and then we've got Green Bay, Superior, quite a few other offices as well. We are in Colorado, and then we're in St. Louis, Missouri, and then we just added Austin, Texas. So some of our prevention programs include counseling, testing, and referral, condom distribution. We also do the Lifepoint needle exchange program. So I'll touch on that a little bit more too, but that is part of why we do the opioid overdose training, because we are working with people who are intravenous drug users and getting them clean needles and getting the dirty needles off the street as well. We also do outreach to men who have sex with men and trans and gender non-conforming individuals. We also work with PrEP, which is the pre-exposure prophylactics, and we do a lot of research. So we kind of touched on the harm reduction theory. What this really is reducing the negative consequences of drug use and other risky behaviors. So you're actually minimizing the harmful effects of drug use rather than ignoring or condemning the behavior. So part of the needle exchange that I do is meeting people where they're at. So rather than you know, saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing drugs or you shouldn't be doing that or whatever. We're meeting people where they're at. We are actually providing clean needles for them, and we are doing testing. So we're checking, you know, testing people to see if they have HIV, hepatitis C, or syphilis, because unfortunately syphilis is making a comeback, and it is quite common with people who have hepatitis C. They also have syphilis. So another part of that is basically prevention for people who use drugs, and then it also is incorporating the spectrum of strategies for safer use management, which then leads to abstinence. All right, so Corey also touched on this. If you're looking at what is an opioid, some common ones that we know: heroin, codeine, morphine, tramadol, methadone. He mentioned the Suboxone. Basically, it has sedative effects, and it affects your respiratory, you know, your breathing, basically. It does connect to the opioid receptors in your brain. So if you look at this picture here, that amount of heroin, the few grains of fentanyl in here, and then the carfentanil, just that one little grain, that's about the same amount. So that would have about the same effect on someone. So you can see where if someone is not used to, or if they're used to that amount of heroin, and then they go to use something laced with fentanyl, or God forbid carfentanil, they're not expecting that, and you can see how that can definitely cause an overdose because they're not used to that fentanyl. And I can echo Corey as far as seeing that fentanyl is everywhere. I mean, I have people who self-report, and we also, as part of our needle exchange program, give out the fentanyl test kits. So they are testing, my participants are testing what they're using prior to using their drugs, and I'm getting feedback that it is literally in everything. I had somebody just the other day, his marijuana had fentanyl in it. So the cocaine and crack is pretty common right now, unfortunately, the heroin as well. But when you hear the marijuana, it's kind of it's a crazy thing. So the basic science of an opioid overdose: the opioid enters the brain. It's then converting to morphine. It's going to bind to those receptors. The opioid receptors actually control your autonomic process. So basically, it's your blood pressure, your arousal, your respiration. So it's affecting your breathing immediately. It's bringing your blood pressure down. So part of that is your body's going limp. Corey mentioned the small pinpoint pupils. Again, the blue or purple cast of fingernails or lips. When you see that, it's very obvious. He also mentioned, you know, the foam cone. Again, they could be vomiting or making gurgling noises as well. Sometimes they don't immediately fall out. They can be just really unsteady and having, you know, some mood swings, and their breathing and their heartbeat is becoming slower. But it's not like, it really depends on the person. You might see it as a gradual thing, and then boom, they're out, they've fallen out. So just a few statistics. So unfortunately, overdose deaths involving prescription opioids have quadrupled since 1999. So have the sales of prescription drugs. So there's kind of going hand in hand. That's also touching on, you know, what Corey was mentioning with people who, you know, had injuries, or people who, you know, were giving birth, and people who were actually prescribed pain pills, and then now are, you know, moving on to street drugs and then going on to heroin. In 2016 and 2017, we had about 42,000 people die from overdosing on opioids. In June of 2016, we're looking at about 650,000 opioid prescriptions dispensed. 580 people initiated heroin use. That's quite significant. Again, in 2016, 2017, we're looking at about 130 opioid-related deaths per day. 85% of overdoses are witnessed. So again, people tend to use in groups, and that's definitely something that you know, we're looking at for sure, and that touches on the Good Samaritan Law, protecting the people who are there to help save their friends. This just kind of shows you male and female national overdose deaths involving opioids. You can see the males, it's definitely a little bit more significant. Again, this is specifically with heroin. There's a huge rise as opposed to just the regular opioid, just looking at opioids as an overview and then specific to heroin. You can see that it tends to be a lot more male users that are overdosing. I did pull the most recent data that I could find with the Department of Social Services, and in Walworth County, there were 7 reported overdose cases. So basically when they call 911 in April, also for March. In Rock County, we're looking at about 20 and then 13 in March. For me, with talking with people who come into the needle exchange, I would say that number's probably double. Corey, you probably would know as well. I mean, I'm sure you're probably hearing a lot more on the streets of people overdosing and not necessarily calling 911. So we do offer the Lifepoint Syringe Access Program, which is the needle exchange, in all of our Wisconsin offices. We have distributed 5 million 2004. This was as of last year, and it's done 43,284 exchanges. The big thing about this is, and part of meeting people where we're at, or where they're at, is the drug treatment referral. So we're looking at about 3,188,689 people who actually accepted a referral to a drug treatment facility. So you're looking at quite a significant amount of people who, started off coming basically to get clean supplies, to get tested, to find out, more about what's going on, what we have to offer. And then once those relationships grow, they then decide that they're, willing to go into treatment. This just kind of gives people an overview based on our offices, what kind of, what we're looking at as far as the needles exchange. So the Beloit office is where I work out of. We're looking at like 141,450 needles exchanged, which ends up being about 2,200 people that we served. As far as clients being referred for drug treatment, we're looking at about 113. Kenosha or Madison are probably the other 2 offices that are closest to you guys. Again, still looking at around the same amount of numbers. Madison, actually, they had significantly more, 571 people referred for drug treatment. All right, so with Vivent Health, and today is a little unique because we are partnering with Jefferson County. Normally we have, so as of last year, we had trained 8,837 people. We had distributed 43,414 doses of Naloxone. And with that, again, with the needle exchange, we had 1,521 overdoses reported to us. So those are peer saves that are reported to us. That's not necessarily the 911 calls. So if you looked at the data side by side, it probably wouldn't match. And again, this is looking at data for offices. Last year with Beloit, we were looking at like 112 peer saves. The Kenosha office, they were looking at 153. Madison office, 256. So that's quite a few. So when we're looking at naloxone, or otherwise known as Narcan, how it actually works in your brain. So your brain has many of the opioid receptors. When that opioid is actually introduced into your brain, it fits right on that receptor and blocks that. So then it's slowing down your breathing and actually stops your breathing, slows your heart rate. With Narcan, what happens with that, it's almost like a little volleyball. It comes right in there. So we have the nasals for this, which is really, really great. A person does not have to be breathing in order to use the nasal Narcan. It actually is absorbed right in the mucous membranes. So what happens is that that Narcan comes in, it bops that opioid right off of that receptor, and it actually helps the person, to come back, to start the breathing just like normal, and brings everything, back to where they were prior to that. The one thing that is really important for people to understand, so with naloxone, it can work for 30 minutes to a few hours. It has happened before where people have not done anything more. They haven't added any more opioids or, you know, added any other drugs to their body, and they've actually overdosed again. So it's very, very important when you do help someone that you have someone stay with them, whether it be you or someone else, just to make sure that that person does not overdose again, because it can happen. Okay, so very, very simple. Once you see someone starting to fall out, or they're turning blue, or, you know, you have any kind of suspicions that they might be overdosing, one thing, if you do administer Narcan to someone who is not overdosing, it's not going to hurt them. It's not going to affect them. It's not addictive. So if someone was having a seizure, say, instead, and you thought it was an overdose and you gave them Narcan, they will be perfectly fine. So one thing that you can do is you can shout at them and scream at them. And if they're still not responding to you, you can actually take your fist and rub it right on your chest bone. It's very painful. So you rub as hard as you can. And that should bring someone, if they're just kind of tired or, you know, taking a nap, they're going to wake up very quickly. So if that still isn't stimulating them and waking them up, then you can decide, if you're by yourself, you can decide if you want to call 911 first, or if you want to give them the naloxone. It's completely up to you. Definitely be ready to call 911 as well. So each of the boxes has 2 of the nasal Narcans in them. So you just go ahead and open the little packaging. It's super easy. One thing that's really important, if you can get the person to be completely flat, it actually helps with gravity rather than having them sitting up in a chair or something that naloxone may not, you know, it does absorb, but it works a lot faster if they're actually flat. So you're going to take the Narcan. There's a little plunger on it. I don't know if you can see that. I'll spray this one. I don't know if you can see that. So you'll push all the way up. So you're going to be putting it right into your nose, right up to that bone, as far as you can get it up there, and then you push all the way. You don't need to prep it at all. It is 1 dose per little nasal thing here. It's very, very simple. Again, you can decide if you want to call 911 first, or if you want to do the nasal Narcan. It's totally up to you. If you have a partner there with you or someone with you, you can absolutely have, you know, one person do one thing and the other person do the other. The rescue breathing is important. You can, you know, I'm not sure. Julie, do you have masks for people? Sorry. Normally we give out masks. I can get you some masks if people don't have them, because some people sometimes are uncomfortable with doing rescue breathing if it's not a person they know, especially if there is fentanyl or other things that are coming out and not being sure. So I can get that to you.
We don't have masks, Erin.
Okay, I'll get you some. So again, if that person is not reacting right away, I would say within the first minute to 2 minutes, if you're not seeing any kind of reaction from them, you're going to want to give them additional doses if you have it. The boxes actually have 2 in it, so you will have 2 right away. It's a good idea to be calling 911 so they're already on their way, because if you've only got that 1 box with the 2 doses and they perhaps need more than 2 doses, they're ready with the EMT and the EMS to be there. And then another thing that's important, the recovery position. So when you've got them kind of flat out, after you've administered the Narcan and you've done the rescue breathing, you can see the little guy here. You can tuck a hand to support their head. Use their knee to prevent their body from rolling on the stomach. You don't want them completely flat on their back once they're laying there. All right. I'm not going to do that. Okay. So again, we kind of went over this already, but just to make sure that everybody's clear, you place your index finger and your middle finger on the spaces next to the nasal tip. The thumb is on the plunger. You're going to insert it into your nostril until your fingers touch the bottom of the person's nose or that bone right there. Again, firmly press that plunger and then throw away the device when you're done. And again, return that person to the recovery position. One thing to note, because the temperatures are getting hotter, Narcan is sensitive to temperature, so make sure you're not putting it in the refrigerator or a freezer or something, or leaving it in your hot car. It does best with room temperature. I mean, obviously, if you have Narcan that is exposed to, you know, different temperatures as opposed to no Narcan. It's better than nothing, but definitely you're going to want to try to keep it as long as you can. And they do have an expiration date, so make sure you pay attention to that. If you have your Narcan for a certain amount of time and you don't use it, and you need to have that replaced, I will gladly do that for you. Julie can get you that information. Otherwise, at the end of this, there's information about my office in Beloit as well. So any kind of questions you have, I'm actually gonna go a little bit forward here. So again, my office is on Grand Avenue in Beloit. Those are the two numbers that you can reach me at. I know that Sam and Walco DAC is actually being really gracious and having the Narcan, the Naloxone there for everyone to pick up. If you need extra doses, or if there is somebody else that, you know, needs training and needs doses of Narcan, please pass on this information to them as well. Is there any questions? I kind of went fast, I'm sorry. Nothing?
So there's a question, Erin, when do we turn them to the recovery position? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Oh, sorry. So initially when you've got them and you're administering the Narcan, after you've waited just a couple minutes or about a minute, minute and a half, you want to turn them then. If they're starting to breathe, or if you're breathing for them with the, with the recovery breathing or rescue breathing, then you want them in that recovery position. Typically, how far out are your EMS and EMT for Walworth County? You guys have a really large county, don't you?
I don't know if Corey can speak to that better than we can, but again, it depends on the location. Corey, do you know response times at all?
Because I was going to say, like for us, I would say Rock County, it tends to be fairly quick. I would say, within 10 minutes tops in most locations, unless people are in more rural areas, then it would be more like a 15-20 minute wait. But
yeah, I'd agree with you. It really depends on where you are. Some rescue squads in certain townships are very, very fast. There's some in the county that are just as fast if you live in a city. But yeah, some of the more rural areas, down in the southwestern corner of our county, down in Sharon, that kind of thing. Other places in the county, it could be a 15 to 20 minute wait for the ambulance. You might get a first responder who's on the rescue squad that lives down the street that is monitoring his radio and can be there faster. But yeah, it's not uncommon to have a 15-minute wait for an ambulance and a full paramedic squad to get there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions? So, did you want me to stop recording now? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording so then we can just kind of have some conversations about picking up the Narcan, but that way it's not going to be recorded anymore. So